Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the War Within beta had quite a bit of a shakeup as of this week's build. With the expansion arriving in just a little bit, now they decided to do a massive overhaul for all of the tanks, essentially nerfing them to make healers a little bit more involved, with healers of all kinds from priests, paladins, shamans, and others getting quite a few buffs. And while a lot of the classes are seeing tuning, with some of the more broken playstyles being adjusted downwards, there's only one class this week that really saw the most amount of buffs, the most amount of positive changes, and that is the class of the Evoker. And recently I got to try the Evoker back again over in the beta, test out a little bit of AUG, a little bit of Dev, a little bit of Prez, with all of these newest adjustments. And this class, while it has mostly been out of the spotlight, except for augmentations, as that has been played everywhere and will likely continue to be in the meta pick going forward, the class of Evoker is actually really feeling all of these new buffs. And I wanted to really do a deeper dive into the class and talk about all of these newest changes. As always, if you guys enjoy these kind of regular class updates for the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. You know, right before we dive into the general Evoker changes, it is so good to come back to this class and play it once again. I almost forgot just how good it is, and Evokers have only seen buffs after buffs over the last few weeks. While Evokers are not like Survival Hunters, Frost Death Knights, Arcane Mages, Affliction Warlocks, or any of some of the more popular and probably a little overtuned classes over on the beta, Evokers are still incredibly fun, from Preservation, Devastation, and yes, even AUG, even though AUG looks like it still probably be a staple of just about every single endgame group and progression, which I hope does see a little bit of adjustment. I just don't want to see one of the more fun classes, which is Devastation, falling behind AUG for yet another expansion, because I feel like that would be cruel, because Dev is actually so fun to play. So when it comes to actual buffs for the Evoker, you have a bunch of different abilities getting buffed up left and right, like Disintegrate ability buffed up by 10%, your Fire Breath ability also amped up by 10%, Azure Breath, but Azure Strike rather, but also your Deep Breath ability, the one that actually, you know, the flyby does a bunch of damage, has scaling with Scale Commander, also amped up by 10%, which is actually really good for Scale Commander, because there are some things that Devastation in particular can do with that Deep Breath playstyle, and Onyx Legacy, and maybe Imminent Destruction, and together with Scale Commander, when it has this debuff mechanic, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There's a lot to take a look at when it comes to Scale Commander in particular, but it's looking really exciting for that hero talent altogether. But also, healing abilities got buffed up as well. Things such as your Verdant Embrace, your single target heal, amped up by 20%. That's a pretty good one for Preservation, but it's also good for Dev in terms of self-healing or group healing. It's great for AUG when it comes to support healing, but for Prez, there's so many abilities that weave together with Verdant Embrace as part of single target burst healing, but also AoE healing with those echo mechanics, as well as other talents. So that's actually a solid buff all across the board for Preservation in particular. Living Flame is another one that got buffed up by 30% in terms of its healing capability. Nothing crazy, but it is going to mean a little bit better survivability for your Dev, your AUG technically, but primarily it's good for as a spot heal ability for Preservation. We'll talk about that when we talk about healers in particular, but because of the tank adjustments they've done recently, they're trying to improve some of that healing for Prez a little bit more, just so they have a bit more spot healing, but the drop-off effect that this could have in a long term could be absolutely massive. From there on, I want to kind of tackle onto all of the other hero talent adjustments that we've seen with Corona Warden, Flame Shaper, and Scale Commander, which haven't seen too many crazy changes, but mostly just little adjustments here and there. For Preservation as Corona Warden in particular, there are a couple of things that they wanted to adjust here specifically, like the ability of Echoes from the Resonating Sphere ability, which is your temporal anomaly that can apply echoes to multiple targets. There was a bit of an awkward interaction with Corona Warden that plays around with that echo mechanic with Golden Opportunity. Casting Echo has a 20% chance to cause your next Echo to be 100% more effective. So they wanted to make sure that this one does not interact with the temporal orbs in the same way. For Flame Shaper, we're also seeing a number of changes as well, like first of all, Consume Flame ability, which is your capstone, where your main ability of Engulf, which is kind of like this puff of damage or healing that is effective. It gets stronger for every single healing over time or damage over time effect on an enemy and or ally. When you use the Consume Flame ability, it consumes a portion of your Dream Breath as a healer or your Fire Breath as a damage dealer, and then essentially ended up changing to Consume Flame no longer double dips on the healing and damage modifiers, mostly for a bug fix. Engulf as an ability for healer evokers, however, can now be stored into your stasis, which is an exciting mechanic. With stasis, once you press it, the next 3 helpful abilities are then going to be stored in memory, and then next time you press stasis, those abilities that you stored can then be unleashed and kind of will use themselves automatically, which is cool. There's a lot of cool things that evokers have been able to do with stasis, like being able to get a bunch of temporal anomalies out to spread echoes on an entire raid, or if you just want to do a big burst healing from all of your empowerment abilities, like a big Dream Breath into a big Spirit Bloom, and maybe another big heal on top of it as well. So stasis can now utilize engulfs. That's very exciting because if you can pre-plan it, that could be a ton of overall group-wide healing. If you can, and it's just exciting that it can support it because I like the ability of stasis. It's one of the complex mechanics of preservation, but once you get around to it, some of the combos you can unleash are absolutely golden. Finally, the Traveling Flame ability, where engulf increases the duration of your Fire Breath or Dream Breath by 8 seconds, cause it to spread to another target. They made it so it will more than likely will try to find a different target when you use it for the Dream Breath ability. So it has a little bit more of a smart targeting mechanic, which is a good thing to see like in raid content or even in dungeon content if you maybe don't get to clip somebody with your Dream Breath when they were out of line. Finally, we have Scale Commander, which is super exciting for both dev and augmentation. This one has been a very, very popular pick because it just allows so much more fun gameplay and just improves the feel of both devastation and augmentation for either one of the playstyles. So this one has gotten a couple of buffs as well. A couple of builds ago, they actually buffed the ability damage of bombardment by 30%. This is like this group mechanic that both aug as well as dev can utilize. The primary target of that mass disintegrate or eruption will mark the target for destruction with bombardment. Any allies that also attack the target will trigger bombardments when attacking and improving the damage by 30%. Adds for better overall your personal damage, but also overall better group contribution damage. So that's always a really good one to see. Another one that got adjusted, which is this week in particular, is the Melt Armor buff, which now has been buffed by 25%. This is huge because Melt Armor kind of makes Deep Breath a very core ability to Scale Commander Evokers, either as dev as aug, because Deep Breath now will put a debuff on the target, making enemies take 20% more damage from your bombardments, as well as Essence abilities for a short 12-second window. This is huge because this allows for Devastation in particular, like aug is definitely going to end up utilizing this, but for Devastation in particular, this makes the Deep Breath mechanic a lot more exciting, and with the Deep Breath buffs we've seen earlier, there's quite a lot of potential that you could put together, like maybe have an Onyx Legacy, which generally is a talent you wouldn't really play right now in Dragonflight, but with some of the adjustments and talents, like there may be situations where you want to utilize the Deep Breath ability to really amp up its value. Plus, Deep Breath has more than one usage out of it because Deep Breath with maneuverability now also adds Deep Breath to burn the target for additional damage over 12 seconds, so even more damage in that regard. And you can combine it together with a big burst talent, since now you have a burst window with the ability like imminent destruction. After Deep Breath, your essence cost of Disintegrate Empire are reduced, their damage increased for 12 seconds after you land, which kind of fits inside of this Melt Armor window perfectly, as long as you can land really quickly and then start funneling out as many disintegrates as you can. This is very, very exciting because we could see Devastation Evokers in particular really leaning heavily into Scale Commander and the Deep Breath window, which could be very exciting and gives you potentially a 1-minute damage profile. Most likely it's going to be guaranteed 2 minutes, since that'll synergize together with the normal Deep Breath being 2 minutes, but still very, very exciting, and you'll likely see even more people running Scale Commander if they aren't doing so already. From there on, we got a couple of adjustments for specs, specifically starting off with augmentation. We're just seeing a bit of a nerf, which I guess isn't really surprising. Augmentation has proven itself to be a very, very popular pick amongst so many other players, so they are seeing a little bit of adjustments to be less mandatory, and I think that's essentially what a lot of players are trying to figure out, how mandatory is aug going to be, because I think it's a very, very fine line. Either you can make them like super undertuned, where it's like, okay, you're probably not bringing an aug, or it's like they're a little bit over the edge where you definitely are, so the line of like with Devastation and augmentation be like very, very close to each other is very, very, very like very thin. It is incredibly paper thin. Draconic Attunement, the Black Attunement of the Black Dragonflight is getting a bit of an adjustment. Black Attunement now increases max health by 2% instead of 4%. So a bit of a overall group party reduction with the talent for Aspect's favor. When Obsidian Scales activates, your Black Attunement is amplified to increase the maximum health of your party by 4% for 12 seconds. This actually has also gotten the nerf where it is now increasing Black Attunement by 1%. So at rank 1 it gives you 3% extra health, and 2% or 2 points it gives 4% extra health. So at most you can maybe increase your allies' health by 6%, which I guess is a buff, but that's what they're trying to nerf, is like group viability, group benefits of augmentation. So I think hopefully make them a little bit more even with that of a Devastation. As for the Spec of Devastation, we're seeing buffs all across the board, very similar to some of the baseline buffs that we talked about, like Disintegrates, your Fire Breaths, your Pyres, your Azure Strikes. Actually, I guess I didn't mention the Pyres yet, have I? But Pyres also getting buffed up. Just about everything in your kit is getting buffed up by 10% on top of those general Evoker changes as well. Like Eternity Surge as an ability, that's gotten buffed up by 10% this week, and previous weeks it got buffed up by 15%. So this ability has been getting more and more and more damage to it, which is really, really good to see. Then Pyre, like I said earlier, just kind of spoiled it, 10% buff there as well. Shattering Star has also got buffed by 10%. Just the damage component of Shattering Star, not the actual like buff window or the debuff window that it puts out on the enemy target, just the actual like when you press the button, the instantaneous damage that it does that got buffed up. For Devastation in particular, the ability of Unravel, in fact, actually got buffed up by 10%, which does a decent bit of Spell Frost damage, but only against shields. So there are some shielded mechanics coming out in this expansion, especially if you play in some of the Mythic Plus keys. There's a lot of enemies that will have a shield that you can actually just cleave right through. And even in some dungeons, there's going to be enemies with a shield mechanic as well. So Unravel actually might get some kind of play, potentially. It is a very, very niche talent, but it is interesting how hard it hits for Devastation in particular. Also, the ability of Firestorm has gotten buffed up by 10%. So basically all across the board, Devastation got buffed up in every way. Whether you want to play like a big red build with Firestorm and really lean into Pyres, or you want to play into more Shatter, blue damage for more single target or cleave action, there's just all those different mechanics that you can invest into. All of them have been buffed up, plus all the different hero talent adjustments that we've seen as well. Devastation overall is just getting raw damage buffs, and it's incredibly, incredibly fun to play. Engulf fixes, however, over the last few weeks with bug fixes, I feel like make Flame Shaper a little bit less good as a hero talent. Like, it's still very, very effective. It still does really well. The fire damage, the group utility you get with life centers, all of that is still really fun. But I think a lot of players are still kind of Scale Commander all the way. I loved the damage amp that Flame Shaper provided, and I really want him to maintain the power of that Flame Shaper, at least for PvE content, because I think that's kind of where a lot of the fun of Flame Shaper and that burst damage really comes from, and that whole kind of dot-esque type of gameplay that you get to play into a little. I think they probably could have maybe explored that a little bit more with Flame Shaper, but I think at this point it's maybe too late to make huge adjustments, but it still is a very fun option. I do think it's just kind of taking a bit of a backseat compared to Scale Commander, especially with some of these more recent buffs. And Scale Commander is just, it just improves everything that Evoker does anyway, but I'm just hoping that Flame Shaper does not fall behind too much, because it's really been a unique playstyle and a very fun choice overall. As for the Spec of Preservation, we do see mostly spot healing adjustments. We took a look at those a little bit earlier with things such as your Verdant Embrace healing, as well as your Living Flame healing increased by 30%. But then the Preservation Spec got a couple of more adjustments afterwards for even more quote-unquote spot healing, such as your Spirit Bloom ability, which kind of splits healing onto multiple targets, which is I guess a way to focus heal a tank, although you use Spirit Bloom for multiple different reasons, honestly. Reversion has also been adjusted, where you can actually now chain reversions, kind of like a pandemic window, like a Warlock is able to refresh your corruption at the last few seconds before the dot fully expires, and those few seconds carry over into that new corruption. So you can kind of do the same thing with reversions now. With a few seconds of reversion left over, you can then kind of reapply reversion, and those few seconds left will carry over into new ones. So that's exciting. So now you can kind of keep a reversion on the tank at all times if you really, really want to. That's really, really cool. It just kind of allows you to maintain reversions on specific targets constantly, if that's the type of healing that you're looking to do. They also adjusted your resources to be a little bit more consistent with the Emerald Blossom and Echoes. Both of those abilities are essence abilities that will consume essence bursts whenever they are active. However, there were a couple of ways where you couldn't control this consumption, because being able to maximize the use of essence bursts is essentially kind of like another way for you to be able to optimize your essence usage, your main primary resource. Though when using stasis and when you bank abilities such as your Emerald Blossom and Echo, all of those, when they're getting released automatically with stasis, they would just instantly consume your resources of essence burst. But normally those abilities don't cost anything. It just stasis releases it automatically. So that's just another way to make sure that preservation does not lose out on those precious resources. Lifebind, a very popular talent, also has gotten adjusted. Nothing really crazy, but they made it so it now triggers its healing from heals that are considered procs. So that's exciting. Not really sure exactly what that means, but over the next few weeks, I'm sure players are going to be able to test it and figure out what works with this change. But potentially anything that just gives you like a proc heal that just kind of happens automatically, I assume is just going to go into Lifebind as well, which will likely mean that preservation is going to be able to do even more of that group healing with Lifebind, and it's going to be even more consistent, and there's going to be quite a lot of new ways that they're going to be able to, I guess, gain additional value from it. Overall, a really good change. Though for the most part, what we've seen with preservation is pure spot healing increases. With the tanks getting adjusted as of this week in particular, tanks are expected to take quite a bit of damage. They don't want healers to focus and do tank healing the entire dungeon encounter, the entire raid encounter, but to be able to give them some assistance whenever they aren't able to heal themselves is going to be expected. So it's a mechanic called spot healing, when you're able to heal certain spots in a group, like a party or raid team, that aren't like a full bar. Somebody's half health, somebody's kind of low, so you just spot heal them to make sure that everybody is sitting at 100%, mostly focusing on single target healing. And that's what preservation is going to be able to do more effectively. That being said, with them buffing abilities such as your Spirit Bloom, with them buffing abilities such as your Living Flame, which, by the way, I noticed a lot of Evokers are running around the beta and they're just spamming Living Flame as a healing ability, and that is like they're ignoring the rest of their kit. Like they are looking at maybe like maintaining Dream Breath or even Reversion whenever allies are healthy and not taking too much damage. But as soon as somebody starts dropping in health, first thing I'm doing is Verdant Embrace. First thing I'm doing is Spirit Bloom. But a lot of people I've noticed on the beta, and I'm going to assume there's just not a lot of experience on Evoker, are just spamming Living Flames to try to top people off. And it's like, oh no. And I wonder if this is just one of those things that I'm just so used to, that being kind of like a cardinal sin, where you don't necessarily use this as your very first ability to heal. You'll use literally everything else, and when you're out of options, then maybe you'll end up spamming Living Flame and there's literally nothing else to do. That being said, I wonder if this buff to Living Flame is just gonna kind of make those players that do end up using Living Flame as the very first healing ability that they ever use, if that's just gonna solidify for them, yep, stick it to spam and Living Flame. I am hoping that they maybe will do something in game to kind of like direct players from spamming Living Flame specifically, because I think too many players, new players that don't really play the class, end up falling in a trap where they just focus on spamming Living Flame to do spot healing, where it's kind of like your emergency heal button when everything else has been exhausted. So I wonder if there's something you could do in order to kind of dissuade players from going to Living Flame as your primary healing option. That being said, they are trying to buff up your overall spot healing as a preservation, which is a good thing. This means overall big healing all across the board, which is fantastic. But also, not only is it single target healing increase, such as with Spirit Bloom, which I guess Blizzard considers a pure single target ability, but also you like your Living Flame as well. But this is also raid healing increases too. Like if you play around with the Lifebind ability and you're able to spread a bunch of echoes on everybody else, an ability such as Verdant Embrace will do a ton of burst healing to everybody, apply Lifebind to the entire party. And then this allows Evokers to use solid, but like really expensive, but also very strong single target heals, such as the Spirit Bloom, and such as, in that specific case, Living Flame, which is kind of part of that combo, to spam as many of those as possible inside of this Lifebind window, which does a ton of group-wide healing. So I wonder if they are aware of it, though make sure not to give Blizzard any ideas, and definitely don't point them to this video whatsoever, just to make sure that they're never aware of this. But overall, what I'm trying to say is preservation with these changes is looking really good. Of course, Blizzard is trying to give them a bit better spot healing to support tanks, which I think they'll have no problem doing, but I think they're actually making them even better for that rate setting as well. So if you're looking for a class, a healer specifically, to do well in dungeons, but also in raids, I think Preservation has an excellent opportunity right now. We'll see how the class is being tuned and what they will do with some of the tier sets, because Preservation's tier set specifically has been adjusted somewhat recently-ish, but it really will depend how strong it is compared to some of the other throughput healers, like Mystery Monks, Restoration Druids, maybe even Resto Shamans, and maybe Holy Priests, to see exactly how well it's going to perform. Though at least when it comes to some of the dungeons, there does seem to be a lot of opportunity for hover type of damage and hover type of healing and hover type of movement in order to gain a lot of benefit, as they made a couple of adjustments. And I never really realized just how strong hover is, because they did adjust a couple of the different bosses. And now it kind of makes sense. It seems like they've adjusted him so that Evoker actually has advantage in some of these fights now. And I wonder if that is part of the reason why they made some of the changes that they have. Like Missile Turn Aside, for example, with the final boss, or the second boss of Siege of Borealis, for instance. And I actually do wonder if that is the actual reason why they added those mechanics, because not the most like mechanics, but they, for an Evoker, they're a breeze to deal with. So that is going to be a very interesting change. Either way, that's going to be the entirety of all the different Evoker changes. And honestly, I've been blabbing about the spec for too long. I want to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Blab away. Let me know what you think about the class of the Evoker. Is this even a class that's on the radar for you going forward for the next expansion? Or are you starting to maybe like consider it? Or is it 100% lock-in class? And if you are, and if you were to play a Evoker, would you kind of lean towards a Preservation healer, the Augmentation support class, or the Devastation pure burst damage class? Let me know which one of the three you kind of vibing with right now, and let me know all the thoughts in the comments down below. And with that, as always, I want to thank all of you so much for watching, and I hope all of you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. And if you would like to join our community or reach out to me directly to just send me a DM, you can join our channel's Discord, which can be found in the description of every single one of the videos. I would love for you guys to join this Discord and channel community. And as always, let me know your thoughts about this video in the comments down below, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.